My name is Ava Bennett. I'm 29 years old, and for most of my life, I was invisible. Not the kind of invisible where people don't notice you at all. No, I was the kind they see but choose not to acknowledge. The kind they tolerate. The kind they quietly dismiss. In my family, I had a label. Not official, not spoken out loud in front of guests, but always there, always understood. The slow one. My older sister, Claire Bennett, was everything I wasn't. Brilliant, polished, effortless. The kind of person who walked into a room and immediately belonged there. Straight A's, debate team captain, Ivy League acceptance before senior year even ended. By 25, she already had 2 degrees and a job offer waiting at one of the most prestigious law firms in the country. My parents didn't just love her, they invested in her. Time, money, attention, belief. Me? I was the backup plan that never got used. We grew up on the upper north side of Chicago, a quiet, expensive neighborhood where the houses didn't just have gates, they had history. The Bennett name carried weight there. It was on plaques inside hospitals, on donor walls in museums, on buildings my grandmother had funded decades ago. My father, Thomas Bennett, ran Bennett Holdings, a commercial real estate company worth somewhere around $80 million, depending on the market. But he didn't build it. My grandmother did. Margaret Bennett. She started with a single office in the 70s. No connections, no safety net, just instinct, and a level of discipline that most people would call ruthless. By the time my father took over, the foundation was already unshakable. All he had to do was not ruin it. At least, that's what she used to say. I was diagnosed with dyslexia when I was 8. I still remember the room. Small, beige walls, a clock that ticked too loudly. The specialist asked me to read a paragraph out loud. The words moved. Not metaphorically, actually moved. Letters flipped places, sentences stretched and collapsed. I got stuck halfway through and just stopped. I remember looking up at my mom, waiting for her to say something, encourage me, defend me, explain. She didn't. Later that night, I heard her talking to my father in the kitchen. She's not like Claire. A pause. We need to be realistic. That was the first time I understood something. Not fully, not clearly, but enough. I wasn't going to be the daughter they were proud of. From that point on, the difference between me and Claire became structured, planned, intentional. When I was 12, Claire got private violin instructor from a conservatory, French immersion classes, SAT prep with a tutor who charged more per hour than most people made in a day. When I asked if I could get help with reading, my mom didn't even look up from her phone. Ava, we've already spent so much trying to figure this out. At some point, you have to accept your strengths. I didn't know how to explain that reading wasn't my strength. It was my battlefield. So I stopped asking. Instead, I adapted. Quietly. On my own. Audiobooks became my way in. I'd listen for hours. Rewind, pause, replay. Until I understood. I stopped trying to read like everyone else. Instead, I started thinking in patterns, shapes, connections. I'd turn chapters into diagrams, arguments into flowcharts, information into something I could see instead of decode. It wasn't perfect. It was slow, messy, frustrating, but it worked. And then there was my grandmother. Every Sunday, without fail, I'd take the train downtown to her apartment. She lived in an old building overlooking the river. Not flashy, not like my parents' place, but real, lived in, warm. Her apartment smelled like books and coffee and something faintly floral I could never identify. She never made me feel like I was behind, never rushed me, never corrected me in that subtle, disappointed way my parents did. Instead, she'd sit across from me at her dining table and explain things like stories. Contracts? She'd turn them into characters. Think of this clause like a promise, and this one, that's the escape route. Business deals? They're not numbers, she told me once. They're relationships wearing numbers as a disguise. One afternoon when I was about 15, I got frustrated trying to read something she gave me. I slammed the paper down. "I can't do this," I said. She didn't argue, didn't correct me. She just reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. "You're not slow, Ava," she said quietly. "You just process differently." I shook my head. "That's the same thing." She smiled. Not kindly, not softly, but knowingly. "No," she said, "it's not." I remember the way she looked at me then, like she could see something I couldn't, something no one else even bothered to look for. "You notice things other people miss," she continued. "Patterns, gaps, weaknesses." She tapped the paper in front of me. "That's not a limitation." She leaned back slightly. "That's an advantage if you learn how to use it." At the time, it sounded nice, encouraging, but I didn't believe her, not fully, because every time I went back home, reality reset. Family dinners were performances, perfect cable settings, perfect conversation, perfect children. Claire would talk about her internships, her professors, her future. Everyone listened, engaged, praised. When it came to me, the questions were different. "How's school going?" Short answers, polite nods, quick topic change. Or worse, jokes. "Still taking twice as long to finish books?" my uncle said, laughing. "Maybe you should just listen to everything then." People laughed, not cruelly, but not kindly either. That uncomfortable middle ground where no one steps in. I remember staring down at my plate that night, not because I didn't have something to say, but because I knew no one was really listening. Under the table, I felt a hand gently squeeze mine. I looked up. My grandmother. She didn't say anything, didn't interrupt the conversation, didn't correct anyone. But the look in her eyes, that was enough. It wasn't pity, it was anger. Quiet, controlled, but unmistakable. That night stayed with me, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. No one defended me, except her, and even then, only in silence. Looking back now, that was the moment something started. Not visible, not immediate, but real. Something that would take years to unfold, years to build, and eventually, years later, it would be the reason everything changed. I graduated in 2022, not from an Ivy League, not with honors, not with anything my family could turn into a dinner conversation. Just a quiet degree from a state university and a resume no one in my family cared to read. Still, I applied to Bennett Holdings, not because I thought they'd welcome me, but because I wanted proof. One chance. One opportunity to show that I wasn't what they believed I was. My father agreed, which in itself should have been a warning. I was hired as an administrative assistant, starting salary $45,000 a year. The same week, Claire joined the company. Her title? Director of Legal Strategy. Her salary? Somewhere around $260,000 plus bonuses. No one said anything about the difference because no one needed to. It was understood. My first day felt like stepping into a world that technically belonged to me, but had no space for me. The office sat on the 38th floor of a glass tower downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble lobby, security that recognized last names before faces. When I introduced myself, people smiled politely, some nodded, most forgot my name within minutes. "Remind me again, are you Claire's sister?" someone asked on day 3. Not Ava Bennett, not an employee, not a person, just an attachment. My desk wasn't even really a desk. It was a small workstation tucked near the copy room, close enough to be useful, far enough to be forgettable. My responsibilities were simple: schedule meetings, book conference rooms, print documents, make coffee when assistants were busy. No one asked for my input. No one explained anything beyond basic instructions, and I was never, not once, invited into a room where decisions were made. But I listened. That's what people forget about being overlooked. When no one sees you as important, they stop filtering what they say around you. Conversations happened in hallways, deals discussed in elevators, arguments whispered just loud enough to carry through thin office walls. And I started noticing something. Patterns. Not in spreadsheets, not in contracts, but in behavior. Who interrupted who deferred, who hesitated, who avoided eye contact during certain conversations. At first, it was just instinct, the same instinct I'd built as a kid trying to keep up in a world that moved too fast. But over time, it became something else. I started mapping things out, literally. In a small notebook I kept hidden in my drawer, I'd sketch relationships, lines between departments, notes about recurring names, arrows showing how money flowed through deals. It looked chaotic to anyone else, but to me, it made sense. Because I wasn't reading information, I was seeing structure. And structure doesn't lie. One afternoon, I overheard two senior executives arguing about a property acquisition. They were debating numbers, margins, risk exposure. I didn't understand every term, but I understood the pattern. Something didn't connect. That night, I stayed late, recreated the deal from memory, drew it out the way my grandmother taught me. And there it was, clear as day. A gap. A misalignment between projected revenue and actual liability. Small enough to overlook, big enough to matter. I didn't say anything because I knew my place. But that was the moment I realized something important. I wasn't incapable. I had just been trained to believe I was. Around that time, my grandmother's health started declining. I visited her one Sunday, like always, but she looked smaller, fragile in a way I'd never seen before. Still, her eyes were the same, sharp, aware, watching everything. She had documents spread out on the table, old contracts, original property agreements, things from the early days of the company. "Sit," she said. I did. She slid one document toward me. "Tell me what you see." I stared at it, the words blurred like they always did, but I didn't focus on the words. I focused on the structure, the relationships between clauses. "There's a weakness here," I said slowly, pointing, "and here, these two don't align." She didn't react immediately, just watched me. Then she smiled. "Your father reads contracts like a lawyer," she said. "He looks for what he can take." She tapped the table gently. "You read them like an architect." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, leaning back slightly, "you don't just see pieces. You see how everything connects." That was the last long conversation we had. A few weeks later, she gave me the wooden box, the same one I hadn't opened yet. "Keep it safe. Not yet, but soon." I didn't ask questions. I just took it. Because with her, things always made sense eventually. She passed away 18 months later. Pancreatic cancer. Fast, quiet. I was there at the end. No one else was. Not my father, not Claire, just me, holding her hand in a room that felt too still. And when she was gone, something in my life shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically, but permanently. Back at Bennett Holdings, nothing changed. I was still the assistant, still invisible, still underestimated. But now, I carried something different inside me. Awareness. I started seeing things more clearly. Not just patterns in business, but patterns in people. And one pattern became impossible to ignore. My father wasn't just dismissive. He was something strategic. He didn't just overlook me. He positioned me, kept me small, contained, predictable. Because as long as I stayed the slow one, I wasn't a threat. Then came April 2024. The email. Subject line, position restructuring, confidential. I opened it, read it once, twice, 3 times. Same result. My role was being eliminated. Effective July 1st. 2 months' notice, a small severance. That was it. No conversation, no warning, no acknowledgement. Just removal. That night, I stayed late, long after most people had gone home. Not because I had work to finish, but because I didn't know where else to go. Through the wall of my father's office, I heard voices. His and my mother's. "We can't have her here when Claire takes over." Silence. "It looks bad." My mom spoke next. Soft, measured. "People will ask questions." "What kind of questions?" A pause. "Why she's still here." Another pause. "Why she never moved up." And then the one that stayed with me. Why she is the way she is. I pressed my hand against the wall, not to listen better, but to steady myself. "We've done what we can," my mother said. My father exhaled slowly. "She doesn't have it." That was the moment everything became clear. This wasn't about performance. It never was. It was about perception. And in their version of the story, I was already decided. I went home that night to my small apartment in Queens. Shared space, thin walls, rent I could barely afford. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel sad. I felt something else, something sharper. If I let this happen, if I walked away quietly, then they were right. Not because I failed, but because I never challenged it. The next day was Claire's celebration, a luxury hotel, hundreds of guests, and I already knew something was about to happen. I just didn't know what. May 14th, 2024. The grand ballroom of the Langham Hotel. If you've never been inside a room built for power, it's hard to explain the feeling. Everything is designed to remind you who belongs there and who doesn't. Crystal chandeliers stretched across the ceiling like constellations, gold-trimmed walls, white linen tables arranged with military precision, a live orchestra playing soft jazz in the background, 300 guests, investors, attorneys, old family friends, people who had known the Bennett name longer than they'd known their own neighbors, and me, standing at the entrance, adjusting a dress I'd bought 2 days earlier for $82. Black. Simple. Safe. Everyone else glittered. Designer gowns, tailored tuxedos, jewelry that probably cost more than my yearly salary. I felt like I had walked into someone else's life by accident. "Ava," my mother's voice. Sharp. Controlled. I turned. She looked exactly like she always did at these events. Perfect. Polished. Untouchable. Her eyes moved over me slowly, from my hair to my makeup to my shoes. That small pause, that almost invisible tightening of her lips, I knew what it meant. "You couldn't find something more appropriate?" she said quietly. "This is what I have," I replied. She adjusted the bracelet on her wrist. Didn't argue, didn't agree, just decided. "You'll be at table 26, she said, near the service entrance. Of course. And Ava, she stepped closer. Her perfume was overwhelming. Tonight is Claire's night. I said nothing. Whatever you're feeling, she continued softly, keep it to yourself. There it was. Not support, not kindness, a warning. Don't embarrass us. She walked away before I could respond. Table 26 was exactly where I expected it to be. Back corner, half hidden behind a pillar, close enough to hear everything, far enough to not matter. The people at my table were distant relatives, the kind you only see at funerals and weddings. They smiled politely, asked surface-level questions, forgot my answers almost immediately. From where I sat, I had a perfect view of the stage, and of her, Claire Bennett, standing under the lights like she belonged there, like she had always belonged there. She wore emerald green, hair perfectly styled, confidence effortless. Behind her, a massive screen displayed her photo in graduation robes. The words, "Congratulations, Claire Bennett, Harvard Law, Class of 2024. The room buzzed with admiration. And then, the lights dimmed, the orchestra stopped. A spotlight hit the stage. My father stepped forward, champagne glass in hand, smile perfectly rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began. The room went silent. "Tonight, we celebrate excellence." Applause. "We celebrate discipline, ambition, and legacy." More applause. Louder this time. 300 people celebrating, and not one of them looked at table 26. Not one. The woman sitting next to me leaned over slightly. "You're Ava, right?" I nodded. "So, what does that mean for you?" I opened my mouth, closed it, because there was no answer that didn't sound exactly like what it was. Nothing. The applause continued. Claire hugged my father. My mother stood nearby, smiling like she had engineered the entire moment herself. And then, something shifted. Not in the room, in me. Because for the first time, it wasn't just painful, it was final. That's when I noticed him, standing near the entrance. An older man, early 60s maybe, gray suit, still posture. He wasn't talking to anyone, wasn't eating, wasn't reacting. He was just watching, and not the stage. Me. Our eyes met. And something about the way he looked at me, it wasn't curiosity, it was recognition. A few minutes later, he started walking towards me, slowly, deliberately, like this moment had been planned. He stopped at my table. "Miss Bennett?" His voice was calm, professional. Every conversation around us suddenly felt distant. "That's me," I said, sitting up slightly. "My name is Daniel Carter." He reached into his jacket and handed me a card. "Carter and Wells, attorneys at law." "I worked with your grandmother." My chest tightened. "She passed 3 years ago," I said automatically. "I know." He didn't sit, didn't soften, just stated. "She left something for you." My pulse started to rise, with very specific instructions about when I should deliver it. From inside his jacket, he pulled out an envelope. Thick, cream-colored, sealed. There was a red wax stamp on the back. Official. Intentional. "Tonight," he said quietly, "was that moment." I stared at it. "What is this?" I asked. He held my gaze. "Your grandmother's will." A pause. "The one your father doesn't know exists." Everything around me stopped. The music, the voices, the applause, all of it faded into the background. I took the envelope. It felt heavier than it should have. "What's in it?" I asked. For the first time, his expression shifted. Not into emotion, into certainty. "Something she wanted you to have on the day your family showed you exactly who they are." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because deep down I already knew. That day had just happened. "I'll be available when you're ready," he added. Then he stepped back, and just like that, he disappeared into the crowd. I sat there for a moment, envelope in my hands, heart racing, trying to process what had just happened. Then I stood up, walked towards the service exit, pushed through the doors and into a quiet hallway. Fluorescent lights, cold air, silence, the opposite of everything happening inside. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal, slowly, carefully, like opening it too fast might somehow change what was inside. 3 pages. Legal text, signatures, dates. I started reading, slow at first, then faster, then again, because I wasn't sure I had read it correctly. But I had, and one line, one single line, changed everything. The hallway was silent, too silent, the kind of silence where even your own breathing feels loud. I leaned against the wall, the document trembling slightly in my hands. I read it again, slower this time, carefully, making sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me, because what I had just read didn't feel real. I, Eleanor Bennett, being of sound mind, legal language, formal, precise. But then, my eyes locked onto the paragraph that mattered, and everything else disappeared. 51% to 49%. That was it. That was the line. 51%. Not half, not shared. Control. Absolute control. I swallowed hard, then read the full clause again. To my granddaughter, Ava Bennett, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Bennett Holdings, along with full voting rights. My hands tightened around the paper. 51% meant one thing, not influence, authority. The will continued, and this part hit harder than anything else. She has been excluded, underestimated, and denied opportunity, not because she lacks ability, but because she was never given the chance. My chest tightened. My grandmother had seen it, all of it, every dinner, every comment, every moment I thought didn't matter to anyone. She saw. Ava is not incapable, the will continued. She was overlooked. I closed my eyes for a second, not to cry, just to breathe. But then came the part that changed everything again, the condition. To activate this bequest, I straightened. Ava Bennett must request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving this document. My heartbeat spiked. Failure to act within this time frame, I already knew I wouldn't like what came next, will render this will null and void. 72 hours. That was it. 3 days to either change my life forever or lose everything without anyone ever knowing. I leaned my head back against the wall. This wasn't just a gift, it was a test, and suddenly everything made sense. The timing, the delivery, the moment. My grandmother hadn't just left me power, she had forced me to decide whether I was willing to use it. Footsteps approached. I looked up. Daniel Carter was standing at the end of the hallway, like he already knew I'd need him. "You've read it," he said. I nodded. "The 72-hour clause," I whispered. "Why would she do that?" He stepped closer. "Because she knew you," he replied calmly. I frowned slightly. "If she gave you unlimited time," he continued, "you might talk yourself out of it." That hit deeper than I expected, because he wasn't wrong. The deadline isn't pressure, it's permission. I looked at him. "To stop waiting," he said, "to stop hoping your family will change." A pause. "And to finally choose yourself." Through the ballroom doors behind him, I could still hear the celebration. Laughter, music, applause. My father, my sister, my family, still celebrating a future that didn't include me. "If I do this," I said slowly, "there's no going back." "No," he replied. "They will fight you. I know. They will try to discredit you. I know. They will say things but can't be taken back." I met his eyes. "They already have." Silence. Then, for the first time, he gave a small nod, like that was the answer he was waiting for. "I can help you file the request," he said. I looked down at the document again, at the signature, at the name of the only person in my family who had ever truly seen me. 72 hours. That clock had already started. I thought about my apartment, my job, my future, about the email sitting in my inbox, the one I hadn't told anyone about yet, my termination. They weren't just excluding me anymore, they were erasing me, and this was my only chance to stop it. I exhaled slowly, then looked back at him. "Tomorrow," I said. His expression didn't change,
but something in his eyes did. Certainty. "We'll file it tomorrow." He handed me a second card, his direct number handwritten on the back. "I'll be ready," he said. Then he stepped aside, letting me pass. I walked back toward the ballroom doors, paused, hand on the handle. Inside was the life I had always tried to belong to. Outside was something unknown, something uncertain, but for the first time, something that might actually be mine. I didn't go back in. That night, back in my small apartment, I sat on my bed, the envelope beside me, the will in my hands, and something else, something I hadn't touched in years, a small wooden box, the one my grandmother had given me, with one instruction: not yet.
The room was dark. Only the streetlight outside filtered through the window, casting faint shadows across the floor. I sat on the edge of my bed, the will beside me, and the wooden box in my lap. I hadn't touched it in years, not because I forgot, because I didn't understand it. Back then, it felt like a mystery. Now, it felt like a missing piece. My fingers traced the edges, smooth, worn, familiar. I could still hear her voice. Not yet. I swallowed. Maybe this is the moment, I whispered to myself. The brass hinges creaked slightly as I lifted the lid. Slowly, carefully, like something inside might break if I moved too fast. There were 3 things: a folded letter, an old document, a USB drive. I stared at them for a few seconds, then reached for the letter first, because somehow I already knew it mattered most. The paper was thick, cream-colored, her handwriting, neat, precise, familiar in a way that instantly tightened my chest. My dearest Ava. I stopped breathing for a second. If you're reading this, then everything has unfolded exactly the way I feared it would. My grip tightened. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive. A pause. But I can protect you now. I blinked slowly, forced myself to keep reading. The document enclosed is the original partnership agreement from 1965. I glanced at the second paper. Old, faded. The one your father has never seen. My heart skipped. It establishes that the founder's shares carry permanent voting rights. I sat up straighter, and cannot be diluted or transferred without full board approval. That meant my father never actually had full control. Not legally, not ever. He tried to take it, the letter continued. My chest tightened again. In 2018, your father proposed a resolution to reduce my voting rights from 51% to 10%. I froze. What? He claimed I was too old to understand the business. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. But the truth was simpler. A pause. He wanted control. I looked at the USB drive, like I already knew what it contained. The board rejected his proposal, she wrote. Barely. And I never forgot what he tried to do. My breathing had changed. Slower. Heavier. But more importantly, I never forgave the way he treated you to justify it. That line hit differently. Because it connected everything. He didn't just ignore me. He needed me to look weak, to make himself look right. To him, diminishing you proved I was unfit. My jaw tightened. You were never the problem, Ava. You were the evidence. Silence filled the room, the kind that forces truth to settle. Use this wisely, the letter continued. Not for revenge. I exhaled slowly. For justice. I lowered the letter. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady. I picked up the USB, walked to my laptop, plugged it in. One file. Board meeting March 2018.mp4. Of course, I hesitated for half a second, then clicked. The screen flickered. Audio filled the room. Eleanor is 81 years old. My father's voice, cold, clinical. She doesn't understand modern business anymore. My stomach twisted. I propose reducing her voting rights to 10%. Silence. Then another voice. Board member. That's a serious move, Gerald. It's necessary, he replied. We can't let emotional decisions impact a $90 million company. 90 million. He said it like that mattered more than anything else. The recording continued. Back and forth, arguments, tension. Then, a voice I hadn't heard in years. My grandmother. Clear, steady. Are you trying to remove me from my own company? A pause. Even in the recording, you could feel it. I'm trying to protect it, he said. From me? She asked. Silence. The clip ended. I stared at the screen. Not shocked, not confused, clear. For the first time in my life, everything was clear. This wasn't about me being less. It never was. It was about control, and I had just taken it back. I closed the laptop slowly, looked at the documents again. The will, the agreement, the letter. 3 pieces, 1 truth. My grandmother didn't just prepare me, she prepared for war. I picked up my phone, stared at the number written on the back of Daniel Carter's card. No hesitation this time. I dialed. He answered on the second ring. Daniel Carter? It's Ava. A pause. Then, I was expecting your call. I stood up, for the first time not feeling small. We're not waiting until tomorrow, I said. Silence. Then a shift in his tone. Sharper. All right, he said. What do you need? I looked out the window, at the city, at everything that had once felt out of reach. Draft the emergency board request, I said. A pause. Then, are you sure? I didn't even blink. They tried to erase me, I said quietly. Another pause. Then, understood. We'll file tonight. I ended the call, set the phone down, and for the first time in 28 years, I wasn't waiting for permission. Across the city, in a penthouse office lit by skyline views, my father poured himself a drink, calm, confident, unaware that everything he built was about to be taken out of his hands.
The May 16th, 9:10 a.m. I was sitting at my desk. Same cubicle, same gray walls, same outdated computer. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. The emergency board request had been filed at 11:47 p.m. the night before. 3 signatures. Daniel handled it. Efficient, quiet, strategic. 2 board members I had never even spoken to had agreed to support it. That alone told me something important. My father wasn't as untouchable as he thought. Still, I said nothing, answered emails, sorted documents, printed files no one would ever read, played my role perfectly. At 10:32 a.m., the shift began. I heard it before I saw it. Footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Then my father walked past my cubicle. Didn't stop, didn't look at me, but something was different. His pace. Too sharp. Too controlled. Like someone trying very hard not to show panic. 30 seconds later, his office doors slammed shut, hard enough to make the glass vibrate. I kept my eyes on my screen, but my attention shifted completely because I knew he had found out. Voices started bleeding through the walls, muted at first, then clearer. "This is ridiculous," my father snapped. Another voice, my mother. "Who filed it?" "I don't know yet," he said. A pause. "Margaret signed it." That name again. "That doesn't make sense," my mother replied. "She hasn't challenged anything in years." Another pause.
longer this time. Then, someone's pushing this. I stared at the screen, not reacting, not moving, because for the first time, that someone was me. A few seconds later, his voice dropped, quieter, more dangerous. Find out who. I almost smiled. 11:05 a.m. My phone buzzed. Claire. Of course. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. What did you do? No greeting, no pretense, straight to the point. I don't know what you're talking about, I said calmly. Don't play games with me, she snapped. I leaned back slightly. Games? I repeated. There's an emergency board meeting tomorrow, she said, requested by Margaret Coleman. Silence. And you think that's me? I asked. A pause. Then, yes. I let that sit for a second, then said softly, maybe she has concerns. You don't even understand how this company works, she shot back. There it was. Same script, different day. I understand more than you think, I said quietly. Silence. Then, whatever you're trying to do, she said slowly, stop. I almost laughed. Why? I asked. Because you're going to embarrass yourself, she replied. This time, I did smile. I guess we'll find out, I said. Then I hung up. 11:40 a.m. The office atmosphere had changed. You could feel it. Whispers, side glances, tension. People knew something was happening, they just didn't know what. And then, my father came out of his office, stopped at my desk. For the first time that day, he looked at me. Really looked. Everything okay? He asked. His tone was controlled, too controlled. I met his eyes. Of course, I said. A pause. Then, good, he replied. But he didn't move, just stood there for a second longer, like he was trying to read something in my face. Then finally, he walked away. And that's when I knew. He didn't have proof, but he had a feeling, and that was enough to scare him. 2:15 p.m. Daniel called. It's done, he said. Board meeting confirmed. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. My heartbeat picked up. Location? I asked. Head office, executive boardroom. Of course, his territory. They'll try to control the narrative, Daniel added. I know. They'll try to discredit you. I know. A pause. Then, are you ready? I looked around my cubicle, at the place where I had spent years being invisible. Yeah, I said quietly. I am. 4 p.m. He found out. I didn't hear it, I felt it. The entire office shifted again, sharper, heavier. Then my phone rang. Claire, again. I answered. You're behind this. Not a question this time, a statement. I didn't deny it. Silence stretched between us. You really think you can do this? She asked. I stood up slowly. For the first time, I said, I'm not trying to think, I'm just done waiting. Her voice dropped, cold. You have no idea what you're walking into. I smiled slightly. No, I said, but neither do you. I ended the call. That night, I didn't sleep much, not because I was afraid, because I wasn't. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into something hoping to be accepted. I was walking in with something they couldn't ignore. Power. May 17th, 9:45 a.m. The elevator doors opened. Top floor, executive level. Marble floors, glass walls. Silence. The boardroom was straight ahead, large, closed, waiting. A security guard stepped forward. Name? Ava Bennett. He checked his tablet, frowned. You're not on the list. Of course I wasn't. Before I could respond, a familiar voice cut in. Let her in. I turned. Claire, standing behind me. Perfect as always, but this time there was something else. Tension. This should be interesting, she added quietly. The door opened, and I stepped inside. 12 seats, one long table, and every person who had ever decided my worth waiting. The room felt colder than the hallway. Not because of the air, because of the people. 12 seats, 12 decisions, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible in that room. Every eye turned toward me, some curious, some confused, some already dismissive. At the head of the table, my father, calm on the surface, but I saw it now, the tension in his jaw, slight stiffness in his posture. He knew. Not everything, but enough. Claire sat to his right, perfect as always, but her composure wasn't effortless anymore. It was controlled, careful. At the far end, a man in his 60s adjusted his glasses. "Let's begin," he said. Robert Hayes, board chairman. This emergency session was requested by 3 board members. A pause. To address a matter concerning ownership structure. Murmurs. Ownership? That word alone shifted the room. He looked toward me. "Miss Bennett," he said, "you've been granted time to present." I stood. Slowly, deliberately. My hands were steady. My voice, even steadier. "Thank you." I placed my folder on the table, opened it. "I understand there may be some confusion as to why I'm here." A soft scoff from Claire. Ignored. "So I'll be direct." I pulled out the document, placed it on the table. "This is the last will and testament of Eleanor Bennett." Silence. Immediate. Heavy. My father didn't move, but something in his face changed. Fast. "That's not possible," he said. His voice was controlled. Too controlled. "You have a copy of her 2015 will," I replied calmly. "This one was executed in 2019. I slid the document toward the chairman. "Mr. Hayes, I'd like this entered into record." He took it, read. His eyebrows lifted, just slightly. "Who authenticated this?" he asked. Right on cue, a chair shifted in the corner. Daniel Carter stood. "I did." All eyes turned. "I was Eleanor Bennett's legal counsel from 2008 until her passing," he continued. "I can confirm this document is valid, notarized, and legally binding." The room shifted. Not loudly, but unmistakably. My father leaned forward. "This is a mistake," he said. "Or a manipulation." I didn't even look at him. "Would you like me to read the relevant section?" I asked. The chairman nodded slowly. I picked up the document again, took a breath, and read. "To my granddaughter, Ava Bennett," the words felt heavier out loud, "I bequeath 51% of my shares in Bennett Holdings along with full voting rights." Silence. Total. Then it broke. "That's impossible," Claire said, but her composure wasn't effortless anymore. It was controlled, careful. At the far end, a man in his 60s adjusted his glasses. "It's not," Daniel replied. My father slammed his hand lightly on the table. "This is absurd," he snapped. "My mother was not in a condition to—" "She was," I cut in. Calm, precise. "And I can prove it." I pulled out my phone, placed it on the table, pressed play. "She doesn't understand modern business anymore." My father's voice filled the room, clear, unmistakable. The recording continued. His proposal, his reasoning, his attempt to strip her power. Then my grandmother's voice, strong, sharp. "Are you trying to remove me from my own company?" The audio stopped. Silence again. But this time, different, heavier, more dangerous. The chairman leaned back slightly, eyes now on my father. "Is this accurate?" he asked. No immediate answer. Claire looked at him, waiting. My father's jaw tightened. "That discussion was taken out of context," he said. "It was recorded," I replied, "and witnessed." No emotion, just facts. Another board member spoke, older, measured. "I remember that meeting." A pause. She was fully aware. Another voice. I do too. One by one, support shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. The chairman looked back down at the will, then at Daniel. Legally speaking, he said slowly, this changes ownership. Yes, Daniel confirmed. He turned to me. Miss Bennett, a pause, you now hold majority control of Bennett Holdings. The room didn't react immediately, because it didn't need to. Everything had already changed. Claire leaned back in her chair, like the ground beneath her had shifted. My father didn't move at all, but I saw it. For the first time, he wasn't looking at me like I didn't matter. He was looking at me like I was a problem. No, worse, like I was power he couldn't control anymore. The chairman folded his hands. As majority shareholder, he said, you have the right to bring motions before the board. Every eye turned back to me. This was it, the moment. I could end everything right there. Remove him, destroy him, take everything. And for a second, I thought about it. About every moment, every insult, every dismissal. But then I remembered her, my grandmother. Not for revenge, for justice. I exhaled slowly, then spoke. I'm not here to remove anyone. The room shifted again, surprised, confused. Claire frowned. My father finally looked directly at me. What I am proposing is a vote. A pause. A vote of confidence. Now they were listening. The board decides whether current leadership still deserves its position. Silence. If the answer is yes, I shrugged slightly. Nothing changes. If the answer is no, I met my father's eyes. Then it's time for something better. The chairman studied me longer this time, then nodded. Is there a second? A voice from the side. I second. Of course. The chairman straightened. All in favor of maintaining current leadership. Hands slowly raised. 4. All in favor of no confidence. 7 hands raised. 1 abstained. The decision was clear. The chairman exhaled quietly. The motion carries. He turned to my father. You have 30 days to resign. No one spoke. My father stood, slowly, looked at me, really looked, and for the first time in my life, there was no dismissal in his eyes, no superiority, just one thing, recognition. He walked out without a word. Claire didn't follow. She just sat there, still, processing. And me? I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free.
The room emptied slowly, not dramatically, not all at once, just quietly. Board members gathered their files, avoided eye contact, spoke in low voices, like something irreversible had just happened, and no one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. I stayed where I was, standing at the end of the table, the same place I had always been placed, but this time by choice. Claire didn't move. She was still sitting in her chair, back straight, hands folded, but the perfection was gone. Cracked. Real. You didn't have to do that, she said finally. Her voice was quieter now, not sharp, not superior, just human. I know, I replied. A pause. You could have removed him immediately, she added. I could have, I said. She looked at me then, not like a rival, not like a stranger, like someone seeing me for the first time. Why didn't you? She asked. I thought about it for a moment, about the anger I had carried for years, about how easy it would have been to turn this into revenge. Because then I'd be exactly like him, I said. Silence. Then something unexpected. She nodded. I didn't see it before, she admitted. See what? I asked. You, she said. That landed heavier than any insult ever had. I didn't respond, because there wasn't anything to say. Some things don't get fixed in one conversation. We walked out of the boardroom together, not close, not distant, just different. He was waiting in the hallway. Of course he was. My father, standing near the glass windows. The city stretched behind him, but for the first time, he didn't look like he owned it. He turned as we approached. His eyes went straight to me. "Was this your plan?" he asked. No anger, no shouting, just something colder. "No," I said. That seemed to surprise him. "This," I continued, "was yours." A pause. "You built this," I said quietly. "Every decision, every choice. You underestimated me." His jaw tightened. "I gave you everything," he said. I almost laughed. "No," I replied. "You gave me nothing." A small pause, and expected me to disappear quietly. Silence stretched between us. For a second, I thought he might argue, defend himself, deny everything, but he didn't, because deep down, he knew. "You think this makes you strong?" he asked. I shook my head slightly. "No," I said. "This just means I finally stopped being weak." That hit him. I could see it. Not like anger, like realization. He stepped back, just slightly. 30 days, he said quietly. Then he turned and walked away. No drama, no final speech, just gone. My mother came later, not in the hallway, not at the office, but 2 days after, at a small cafe. Neutral ground. She looked different, not polished, not perfect, just tired. "I'm sorry," she said. No build-up, no excuses, for everything. I studied her. "Why now?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "Because now I can't pretend anymore." That was honest, painfully honest. "I thought we were protecting you," she continued. "I thought lowering expectations would make things easier for you." I shook my head. "You didn't lower expectations. You erased me." Tears filled her eyes. "I know," she whispered. And for the first time, she didn't try to defend it. We didn't fix everything that day. That's not how real life works. But we started something that had never existed before. Truth. A week later, the company announcement went out. Leadership transition, board restructuring. My name finally where it should have been, not hidden, not ignored, recognized. Messages started coming in, people who had never spoken to me, people who suddenly remembered I existed. I didn't respond to most of them, because I understood something now. Respect that only shows up after power isn't respect. But one message I kept, from someone who had worked with my grandmother. She always said you saw things others missed. I read that message 3 times, not out of habit, out of understanding. Months passed. Things changed, slowly. I didn't take over the company, not completely. Instead, I built something new inside it, a division focused on growth, sustainability, real impact, something that felt like her, like what she would have wanted. My father resigned, quietly. No scandal, no explosion, just a name stepping out of a position it once controlled. We talk sometimes, short conversations, polite, not close, but no longer pretending. Claire and I, that took longer. But one day, she said something that stayed with me. I spent my whole life being perfect. A pause, and still felt like it wasn't enough. I looked at her. I spent my whole life being invisible. A pause, and thought that was all I deserved. We both smiled, not because it was funny, because it was finally honest. And me? 6 months later, I stood in my own apartment, small, but mine, a framed photo of my grandmother on the wall, watching, like she always had. "You gave me everything I needed," I whispered. Not the company, not the shares, the clarity, the truth, the permission to stop asking for approval. Because in the end, this was never about revenge. It was about something much harder.
walking away from the version of yourself that was built to survive other people's opinions and becoming someone who no longer needs them. If you've ever been overlooked, dismissed, or made to feel like you're not enough, remember this: you don't need a moment like mine to change your life. You just need to stop waiting for permission, because sometimes the real power is finally seeing yourself clearly. And once you do, no one can take that away from you.
If this reminded you that your value remains unchanged even when others fail to recognize it, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share your own journey in the comments. For more accounts of everyday people finding the strength to stand their ground, follow the link in the description. I appreciate you being a part of this community and for lending an ear. See you in the next one.